This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Kansas Farm Service Agency Farm Loan Chief Josh Ritter begins today's show by reminding listeners about the Emergency Loan Program at FSA. He explains the eligibility and requirements. Logan Simon, K-State Extension agronomist, keeps the show rolling, discussing his recently published research on the benefits of grazing cover crops. The show wraps up with K-State's Brad White, Phillip Lancaster, and Bob Larson with another segment from the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast. The experts discuss how producers should approach removing bulls during the breeding season. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show with Kansas Farm Service Agency Farm Loan Chief Josh Ritter. Josh, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks. Good to see you.
Josh, talking about a program that's from the Farm Service Agency, as a lot of Kansas producers have been dealing with drought and other disasters right now. Is there a loan program that maybe producers might want to look into?
Yeah, there is. We do have an emergency loan program at FSA. That program is available to help producers recover from production and physical losses due to drought, flooding, and other natural disasters. Currently, several counties in Kansas have a disaster designation for drought.
And how do they get that designation of being a disaster for drought?
That's a great question. It can be presidentially declared. It can be declared by the Secretary of Agriculture, or also our FSA administrator can declare those droughts.
So if a producer is in this scenario, how can funds from FSA's emergency loan program be used?
Yeah, those funds can be used to restore and replace property essential to the farm operation, pay all or part of production costs associated with the disaster year, pay essential family living expenses, reorganize the farming operation, and also refinance some debts.
And so who is eligible for these FSA emergency loans?
Yeah, our emergency loans can be made to farmers and ranchers who own or operate land located in a county declared a disaster area as a primary disaster area. And also all counties contiguous to the declared or designated primary counties are also eligible for emergency loans. So it can be obviously the declared county, then any counties touching it basically are eligible. Those farmers and ranchers need to be established farm operators and have sufficient farming and ranching experience. They need to be citizens or permanent residents of the United States. To qualify, they have to have suffered at least a 30% loss in crop production or a physical loss to livestock products, real estate, or chattel property that's attributable to the declared disaster. They need to have an acceptable credit history. They need to be unable to receive credit from a commercial source. They need to be able to provide collateral to secure the loan and also have repayment ability.
What requirements do these producers with the Farm Service Agency need to meet to be able to get potentially an emergency loan program?
Our loan requirements are different from those of other lenders, other commercial lenders, your conventional lenders, I guess. Some of the more significant differences are that borrowers must keep accurate and acceptable farm records. They need to operate in accordance with the farm plan they develop and agree to with their local FSA staff. And then borrowers may be required to participate in financial management training program, and they need to obtain crop insurance as well.
And what could be considered maybe accurate and acceptable farm records?
Just making sure that they're keeping those. There's a lot of different things, but they just need to be keeping records that are verifiable, that we can either understand when they give them to us or they can explain to us, in a fairly easy manner. So.
And Josh, earlier you mentioned collateral, and what collateral needs to be available to secure a loan?
Yeah, that's a good point. All of our loans need to be fully collateralized, so that means that there needs to be enough security available to make sure that the loan is fully secured. If applicants applying for an emergency loan cannot provide adequate collateral because of the disaster, repayment ability may be considered as collateral to secure the loan if some specific conditions are met. So there is some leeway there because we know people might be affected by the disaster, might not have that collateral available. Specific types of collateral is going to vary depending on the loan purpose, repayment ability, and the individual circumstances of the applicant. But most of the time we're going to require a first lien position on any property or products acquired, produced, or refinanced with our loan funds.
For our listeners who are thinking that this might be something that they're needing to look into doing, can you tell us a little bit more about the loan limit and loan terms for this program?
Yeah, I can do that. Producers can borrow up to 100% of actual production or physical losses to a maximum loan amount of $500,000. Loan for crop, livestock, and non-real estate losses are normally repaid within 1 to 7 years, depending on the loan purpose, repayment ability, and collateral available as loan security. In special circumstances, a term of up to 20 years may be authorized for some operating loans. Loans for physical losses to real estate are normally repaid within 30 years, but may be extended to a maximum of 40 years if certain circumstances are met as well. And right now, the current interest rate for our emergency loan program is 3.75%.
Are people able to pair this program with other loan programs through the Farm Service Agency?
Yep. You can apply for an emergency loan at the same time they would apply for any regular real estate loan or operating loan.
Josh, is there any other important information that people need to know about if they're looking into this emergency loan program from the Farm Service Agency?
Yeah, it's important for everybody to note that there is an application deadline for the emergency loan programs. So applications for emergency loans must be received within 8 months of the county's disaster designation date. We send out notices when those dates occur, but if you're curious, it's always good to check with your local office and they can kind of give you those dates for your specific county.
And are there any servicing options available for existing FSA direct loan borrowers that have been affected by drought or other disasters?
Yeah, there are. FSA, we do have servicing options available for existing borrowers that have been affected by natural disasters. One of the options available is our disaster set-aside program. And under this program, borrowers are allowed to move their current loan installment payment to the end of the loan term. So this allows borrowers to free up money that would have been used to pay FSA loan payments to use for other farm expenses or other debt payments. We also have debt restructuring available under our primary loan servicing program. So options for borrowers who meet restructuring approval requirements may include restructuring the loan over a period of 15 years for a loan made for an operating type purpose or 40 years from the date of the original loan for a real estate debt, consolidating or combining the outstanding balances of loans made for operating purposes, and interest rate reduction if our current interest rate is lower than the rate on the existing loan.
If people are wanting to find out more information about this emergency loan program or all the other programs the Farm Service Agency has to offer, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah, I always recommend producers start with their local FSA service center. We do have 21 FSA offices in Kansas for farm loan programs. So if your local office does not administer the program, they'll be able to get you the contact information for the FLP side that you're going to need to work through. Additionally, there is a lot of information on our Farmers.gov website, which is www.farmers.gov, regarding loan programs available through FSA. That website is going to include a farm loan assistance tool that explains various loan options to users and also provides some guidance on how eligibility is determined for FSA farm loans. In order to directly access the farm loan tools available through Farmers.gov, you can go to farmers.gov/loans.
Josh, I appreciate you once again taking some time to join us and share with us some information about the emergency loan program and how people can always find out more information from the Farm Service Agency.
Yes, thanks for having me. I appreciate the time.
That was Kansas Farm Service Agency Farm Loan Chief Josh Ritter. And as always, if you're looking to find more information from the Farm Service Agency, a great place to do that is by going to www.farmers.gov. Again, that is www.farmers.gov. If you're specifically looking to find out more information on farm loan tools, you can do that by going to farmers.gov/loans. Again, that's just putting /loans. And as always, while you're on farmers.gov, you can find your local FSA Service Center. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by Kansas Livestock Association's Scarlett Maydinger as she shares information on a new cost share program which is being made available to Kansas feed yards and dairies.
The Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Conservation has announced the availability of funds in the form of cost share assistance to aid feed yards and dairy operations in their efforts to conserve water. The Kansas Livestock Water Efficiency Pilot Project is designed to enhance and/or upgrade current large-scale livestock watering systems in commercial feed yards and dairies by providing cost-share assistance for practices such as upgrading to high-efficiency livestock waterers and water recycling systems. Funding is provided through appropriation from the State Water Fund. Stock water right holders annually pay fees totaling nearly $500,000 that go into this fund. The Kansas Livestock Association supported the legislation authorizing this cost-share program, which makes those dollars available to livestock water rights holders implementing water conservation projects. The Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Conservation will accept applications through the close of business July 31st. Equipment purchases and subscriptions made before application approval are not eligible for this initiative. Eligible applicants must hold a current livestock water right with the state of Kansas. For an application or more information on the details about funding eligibility, go to agriculture.ks.gov and click on Public Resources, then Grants and Cost Share Programs, then Conservation. The application is a fillable PDF. I'm Scarlett Madinger.
Once again, that was Kansas Livestock Association's Scarlett Madinger as she shared about the new Cost Share program that's an initiative focused on water conservation, which is available to Kansas feed yards and dairies. If you're interested in finding out more information, you can do so by going to www.agriculture.ks.gov/DOC livestock water, or you can send an email to Dave Jones at david.jones@ks.gov. I will link all of these resources in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by K-State Extension agronomist Logan Simon as he talks about the benefits of cover crop grazing. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about the benefits of grazing cover crops with K-State Extension agronomist Logan Simon. Logan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Shelby.
Logan, this was a full research project that's been going on for multiple years for you, and can you tell us some background to how you found out about the benefits of grazing cover crops?
Yes, so this study began in 2018. It was an on-farm study that we conducted on 3 farms in central and western Kansas, looking at the impacts of grazing cover crops. So during that time frame, there was still a lot of concern, you might say, among some groups that grazing cover crops, especially on our no or conservation till acres, could cause some negative impacts in terms of soil health. And so there was some concern that we could lose some of the benefits that we expect from cover crops for soil health, and also some concerns about compaction. But when we think about our Kansas dryland acres, for a lot of those folks, cover crops are really hard to make pencil out. And grazing is one opportunity that folks have to recover some of that cost of these cover crops. And so that was really a motivation for conducting this study, was to say, well, what really are the impacts of grazing with conventional producer practices? What are the impacts on soil properties under these dryland Kansas conditions?
And Logan, we'll talk about what impacts you did see from grazing cover crops. But first, how heavy were those cattle being stocked on those fields?
Yeah, so that's an important factor here, is that stocking density is always going to be an impacting factor here. What we were looking to achieve was essentially a take half, leave half sort of approach, which is today the recommended practice for cover crop grazing. Like I say, it was on farm, and so we allowed our 3 cooperating farmers a lot of freedom to graze and implement their grazing strategy in a way that worked best for them on their ground. But all in all, we ended up narrowing right down to that kind of take half, leave half approach. If we graze harder than that, the impact could be different from what we saw in this study.
And something that seems to be a concern when we are putting large animals on a field can be soil compaction. And did you see any concerns with that?
So that's an important factor with cover crop grazing. And so averaging across the three farms that we did this evaluation on, and something that I forgot to mention earlier was that each of these three farms actually had 2 rounds of cover crop grazing on them. So that's each one of these farms would have had cover crops grown and grazed twice by the time we went to in their various crop rotations. By the time we went in to collect our soil samples, across the 3 farms that we evaluated, we did not see any significant increases in soil bulk density or penetration resistance. And those are 2 factors that are going to essentially measure the density of soil solids per unit volume. And in the case of penetration resistance, it's kind of simulating the amount of force it would take, in this case for a metal rod, to penetrate the soil, but is a pretty good equivalent to a root trying to penetrate the soil. And across, again, like I say, across these 3 farms that we evaluated on, we saw no differences between where cover crops were grazed versus where they were not grazed.
Did you see any increases in other places?
Yeah, so we evaluated a whole suite of soil properties across these 3 farms because we really wanted to get a strong idea of the impacts of cover crops and grazing on the whole suite of soil health indicators. There were a lot. The moral of the story is that we didn't see a lot of differences in most of our soil properties, which in this case is kind of positive because we didn't see changes in soil compaction. We also didn't see any sort of impacts on some of our indicators of soil structure and potential erodibility. So that was great too. But to get to your question about did anything really change, we actually did see a significant increase in soil organic carbon stocks, as well as soil potassium in our grazed areas compared to our ungrazed areas. And that was really interesting for us to see happening on these farms. And one of the thoughts could be that we're seeing some benefits of that manure deposition, where we had cattle out on the field and they were grazing and distributing manure across the field. Also keeping in mind that it was a take half, leave half scenario. So there's still quite a bit of residue out there in addition to that manure and urine that are going to be cycling out there where cattle are grazing.
How might a cattle producer or someone with a diversified operation want to integrate this into their management strategy? So
that's the thing. These strategies really are best suited for the operator that is diversified and has both crops and livestock. For folks looking to integrate cover crops and looking to integrate grazing, some important factors that I would consider are good planting windows, where you're able to plant that cover crop, get it up, and get some biomass out there to graze on during the time of year that maybe would complement your existing forage resources. So maybe your wheat spot is in the early spring. Maybe it's in the late summer. Cover crops could play a role to fill that niche. If you're going to be grazing cover crops, we really encourage folks to be mindful of selection of cover crop species. Some of our species can be a little bit problematic from an animal health standpoint. We have a really good extension publication out there on toxic plants that I really encourage folks to keep an eye on when making selections for cover crop species. The other thing to keep in mind once you've got all of these figured out is really water for those cattle as well. And so keeping in mind what your strategy is going to be for that. Are you interested in hauling water? Could this become something that you do regularly to the point that you might consider installation of a permanent watering site at some of these fields? those are all important things to consider when you're thinking about incorporating cover crops and grazing on your farm.
Logan, as you concluded this study and it's now published, what are the key points that you'd like to really share with cattle producers or people growing cover crops?
Yeah, so what I would really like to share with folks is that cover crops are an important tool out there. They're not always the answer to every problem we have out there on the farm, but they're an important tool for us. And we have a lot of flexibility in the way that we can utilize them. And so the results of this research really highlight the fact that integrating livestock with cover crops can bring a lot of benefits to our folks here in Kansas, and so can be a really good tool for folks. I will plug that our research here specifically looked at that take half, leave half scenario that I mentioned earlier. But the results of this study, of course, showed we were not reaching a level that was causing any sort of compaction or issues like that. And so the question that came from this research was, can we graze heavier? What would happen if we did? And so we have a follow-up on-farm study happening right now. We just finished this spring the second round of soil sampling on that field. So the second cover crop that was grazed, same grazed and ungrazed areas stayed the same a couple years in a row. We just finished the second round of soil sampling and are really excited to see what we're able to learn from that with regards to increasing our stocking density and maybe grazing these covers a little bit harder, getting more pounds of beef from this cover crop that we're growing. But it's all about balancing these goals, right? So pounds of beef produced, but also these benefits to soil health and water quality and all those important aspects.
Logan, is there a way people could read more on this topic?
Absolutely. So this article titled Cover Crop Grazing Effects on Soil Properties in No-Tillage Dryland Cropping Systems in the Central Great Plains was published in the journal Agriculture, Ecosystems, and Environment. It is available open access for the next 50 days, and I highly encourage folks to take a look, see more about the research that we did.
Logan, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was Kansas State University Extension agronomist Logan Simon as he talked about how grazing cover crops benefit soil health in dryland systems. If you'd like to read more on this research, you can read the article Cover Crop Grazing Effects on Soil Properties in No-Tillage Dryland Cropping Systems in the Central Great Plains. This article is published in the Journal of Agriculture, Ecosystems, and Environment and is available for free through August 20th. I, of course, will also link it in today's show notes on acttoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but stick around because we have more for you ahead.
You're tuned into Agriculture Today. I'm Jacob Cloughton for Shelby Varner. And we end today's show with Brad White, Phillip Lancaster, and Bob Larson from the Beef Cattle Institute.
Let's talk bull removal. So, Bob, a lot of times, I'm going to start with you, but we talk about calving season, then go into breeding season, and breeding season may start mid-May, meaning if I want a 60-day calving season, I need to pull out the bulls mid-July, which can be kind of challenging. So tell me, what are your thoughts on how do I get those bulls out? How do I make this decision on getting them out 60 days after the start?
All right, well, I'm going to say something that maybe some people would disagree with me on is I'm not in a hurry to take those bulls out. Even though I am a big proponent of a controlled short calving season, such as a 60, anywhere from 50 to 70, 75 days, kind of 60 that's a good number. I like a 60-day calving season. But bred cows generally are worth enough more than open cows. I would like to leave the bulls in there and let those cows that would have been open if we'd removed the bulls, give them a chance to become pregnant later in the breeding season. But that does require that I do a preg check where I can identify those late-bred cows and treat them as a cull. They're just a value-added cull. They're not a part of my successful breeding season.
So what you're saying is you like a 60-day calving season, but that does not have to mean a 60-day breeding season.
Absolutely.
You can have a longer breeding season. You're using preg check to get down to your 60-day calving season. So I like that because I don't really like going out mid-July and getting the bull out of the pasture. But there may be some instances I want to do that. Phillip, I'll turn to you and say, what are times that you say, maybe I need to get that bull out for one reason or another?
Well, so, I mean, it could be that the bull's getting excessively thin, or if it's a young bull that he still needs to grow. So maybe I want to go ahead and get him out of there so I can put him on a little better nutrition, especially we're getting into late summer here. Forage quality is starting to decline some, and so he may need some better nutrition to keep growing. Another thing you might want to think about if I have multi-bull pastures is bulls continuing to fight and things like that. And so bull injury is still a risk. And so maybe if I only have a few cows in there that are still open, maybe I want to pull all the bulls out, but maybe one or two.
How does that fit with what you were saying, Bob?
Yeah.
Because we won't know if they're pregnant at that point.
Correct. But I really like what Phillip said in that it kind of takes this decision and adds a little, maybe a little bit of complexity to it instead of just a simple, you should leave the bulls in or you should leave the bulls out. Kind of look at your bulls, and particularly in a multi-bull pasture, maybe remove some of the bulls. And again, it doesn't have to be right at 60 days after the start of the breeding season, but at a time when you're moving cows or you're doing some fly control or something like that. If I'm going to gather the cows, evaluate the bulls, decide if and there should be many fewer open cows, this late in the breeding season, that I don't need the bull power that I needed at the first. And so you start really kind of thinking through, well, how many bulls do I need and which bulls? So anybody thin, anybody young probably needs to come out. But then maybe one of the older bulls that looks in good shape, no indications of problems with lameness or anything like that, and leave him in for a little bit longer. And again, I want to look at it as a strategy to add value to open cows.
But then I've still got some of the work of pulling out some of the bulls, which is challenging. And I think the labor part of this is an issue, especially when we're out on summer grass. Are you okay if it's a labor issue to leave all the bulls out until preg check time, until weaning? How long would you leave them out there?
I would say yeah, but then use the situation that you're dealing with. In that, if I've got labor for another reason, again, I'm moving pastures, I'm doing fly control, I'm doing something like that, at that point, you can think about anything that you want to accomplish in that kind of time frame. But if you're not, if the cows are still out on pasture and you're not moving them, because really either I am going to have to gather the cows or I have to go to the work where I'm setting up panels and trying to, herd a bull into a catch pen or something like that, all of which can be difficult, possibly dangerous. And so I think, maybe the take-home is, although I really like a 60-day calving season, I do not think that you have to have exactly a 60-day breeding season.
That's all we have for now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.